This is part 2 of Pink Floyd's albums all ranked, and if you haven't checked out part 1, make sure to do so before checking this one out. So now we dive back into Roger Waters' territory with the pros and cons of Hitchhiking. I know this is an album that a lot of people really rate highly, and for me, it's not one that I think is his best works. Certainly it's good, certainly it's very good, but one that I believe is not as good as some of the stuff that came later. Maybe that's because I got to this album, probably last. I think I got Amuse to death first, and I worked my way to Radio Chaos and then his recent works, and then the pros and cons of Hitchhiking was probably the last record of his I got to. So I don't really enjoy it. I probably only heard it for the first time in full a couple of years ago, and I don't find it incredibly awe-inspiring as many people would say, which is probably a bit of a shame. Many people would be highly defensive of this record, I would say. A lot of people say it's his best, but I don't see it that way. I think it's interesting. You've got obviously the album cover that had to be censored for its release over my shoulder here. Pretty cool album cover, and also a nod to the author of the book of the same name, Pros and Cons of Hitchhiking. Through the Galaxy. That was my bad. But yeah, it's certainly an interesting album to have, because you've got the album tracks, which, it starts at the story of 4:30 a.m, and then it's got some parentheses of what this is, and obviously it ends at 5:11 a.m. on the last track there, and runs through its entire time. So it'd be interesting, I guess, to revisit this album. I don't know, to revisit this album at that time frame. Maybe there's something I'm kind of missing there, and maybe I should go somewhere at 4:30 in the morning and listen to this album full. Maybe there's something that I'm missing. But yeah, it's certainly, it's not a bad album. It's pretty cool. I don't mind it at all. But again, this is just, Roger Waters' albums can be, I don't want to say drab, a full-on affair, I guess. Really got to be immersive to it. Sign yourself up for the record. It's not picking a few tracks in the mix here, and pros and cons, it's got to be played in full for sure. Decent tracks on the mix, but outside of that, there's still, I think even Roger Waters said about this record that he thought that it was alright in pieces. I might be mistaken there, but I thought he said about this own record that everyone loves, that he said it's fine in hindsight after all this time. And there was, I think, the pros and cons of Hitchhiking Part 10. He said that was a really good track that he loved, and he liked it, but looking back at it, maybe avoid a few tracks. I don't know. What's your thoughts about this album? I'm curious, because a lot of people from the Roger Waters band camp might say this is the best. I'm not one of those, though. So let me know below. The next one on my list is going to be David Gilmour's debut first solo album, of course, his self-titled one. And, it was always an interesting cover, odd one, I should say, and one that I didn't really get around to listening to for a while. But it's like David Gilmour adventures a little bit here on the bluesy side of things with this record. It's a bit different from, the stuff he was writing at the time, but a very interesting record, and bit of a portrayal of, I guess, what he wanted to try and do around this time. Maybe he felt a bit stifled with Pink Floyd and thought, I could do my own solo thing here and write what I want to, play what I want to here, and this was the outcome. This, in the middle of 1978, David Gilmour releases this solo album, and it really ended up on the back burner, I think, in hindsight. From my understanding, it didn't really chart too well, didn't succeed too much. There wasn't really much in the way of singles or anything like that, but there is one phenomenal track off this that I absolutely adore. And I remember, I found this album only a couple of years ago, and the track itself is There's No Way Out of Here, and it is such a deep track. It's this darkly ominous piece that just, is just David playing guitar, doing his thing, and there's no way out of here, and then the bass playing on. So it's really, I love that track. I can't stress that point so much. I can only stress it so much, I should say. It's such a phenomenal track. I love it. It made it to a playlist. I played that. I think it became one of my top 100 songs of the year for Spotify, which it does when it releases its thing. I played it that many times. It ended up in my own charts, and that would have been years ago now. It's an album I probably haven't played in full. I don't think so. I probably played the first 4 or 5 tracks. I don't think I played the other couple of tracks as the ending. But I think it's a pretty solid album from what I have heard. I really should give it a full playthrough though. For some reason I just never get around to it. By the time the second track, There's No Way Out of Here, comes through, I'm like, alright, I've heard that track now, I love that track, yep, that'll do it. That's my David Gilmore fix. But yeah, it's an interesting one. For his first debut album, it certainly is a very interesting piece. So we get to the first Pink Floyd album, of course, without Roger Waters. We're talking about post-Roger Waters Pink Floyd era here. A Momentary Lapse of Reason, released in 1987. This certainly had some strong singles released from the album, such as Learning to Fly, and of course, I think it was the other one on the Turning Away. I can't remember now, maybe Sorrow. But no, it was on the Turning Away from memory. And Learning to Fly was a massive song for Pink Floyd back in the day. I remember the video clip for it, and it, captivated me. It was certainly an interesting, it's a really good piece compared to, I guess, many of the tracks on here. It's a bit different as well. But, A Momentary Lapse of Reason, of course, with that awesome Pink Floyd cover art there, the bed's just extenuating down the beach, and I think they actually created that in real life. That's no Photoshop or nothing like that. That actually was created from memory. It took a couple of days to do it, but they did it. I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong there, but I have a funny feeling they took a couple of days to make all that happen, There's a few other tracks as well with the Dogs of War, which I thought was pretty cool. A New Machine was okay, it's alright, but Sorrow was another really good one. Track that gets a lot of flack as well was Terminal Frost, from what I understand, not a very memorable track compared to some of the other ones there. But it's a weird one for me because it's almost like Pink Floyd having teething issues post Roger Waters. It's a bit boring at parts. It misses the mark on a lot of the tracks, and obviously there's only 2 or 3 albums post Roger Waters, but compared to the next one coming up, but compared to the next one, this one kind of failed to really land Pink Floyd with some decent hits, excluding Learning to Fly. As a whole, I'm talking about the album. It just was a hit and miss effort. There's a few tracks there, then there's a few tracks you would skip over. I think someone described it as well as a very boring album live, from what I understand there. So, I don't mind it. It's just one I don't rush to, but it does rate higher than a fair few of the records, of course, from earlier. Amuse to Death is the next one that's up for me, and this is the first Roger Waters album I actually got, first solo album of his, and this is quite the interesting one. I remember I found it actually in Waz's list, the CD copy of it, I found it, I knew who Roger Waters was at the time, and I'm like, oh, I didn't know he did some solo stuff, I'll check this one out. Interesting album cover as well, true to Roger Waters' faith, I suppose you could almost say, or his style rather. And Amuse to Death, I remember playing it, and I loved it. It was really cool. Really interesting album. He's really coming into his own as a solo artist, right, from what he does, And it's always funny, because, I look over the track list, and it's like, part 1 here, part 1 there, part 2 there, and you're going through it. The Ballad of Bill Hubbard, the intro track, But then you got What God Wants, part 1. Then Perfect Sense, part 1. It's all mixed up, but it still works. It's really well edited, and it flows rather well, seamlessly between tracks. It doesn't lose its focus. it is a very solid album overall as far as production goes and the way it all transitions between the songs there. And you know, there's just a lot going on with this. It is a heavy album, but it's one that I do enjoy coming back to and listening, you know, from time to time. The thing is, it is a very, you know, darkly glum record, especially with lyrics that rather are still poignant in this day and age, considering current political events. You know, so you're going through it, and if you're listening to it, you'll know when it comes up. You'll know the track, but you know, it's still a very good track. It's a very good album. I think, in my opinion, one of my favorite Roger Waters ones. So yeah, that for me, Amuse to Death, solid album there. And we land on the last Roger Waters album for him, and that's Is This the Life We Really Want? His 2017 release. I thought this album was freaking awesome. It's interesting, I guess it only came out, 6 years ago now? And for the time, I'm like, damn, Roger Waters still has it. How that has changed now. But you know, at the time when this came out, it was an extremely powerful record. When we were young, kicks it off, Deja Vu going into it, and it just flows on from there. And of course, there's a lot of you know, heavy lyrics. Again, that's Roger for you. It just always will be Roger. It's always a heavy album. You know, you're not going to go into it and expect, I guess, a happy tune. There's a lot of depth and political or otherwise stories to tell behind his lyrics. And is this the life we really want? The first thing that always got me, actually, I gotta say, this is the album cover, which looks very similar to Radio Chaos, just in a different colour scheme. Of course it's not, it's censored, everything's censored, blacked out, but I always found, looking at it just looks like a Radio Chaos, but if it was in black and white. Anyway, it's a really solid album, I thought. Roger Waters still had it. I had high hopes for the guy, you know, moving towards the future. I thought maybe he will have another one out, and, well, he did. Just damn shame that you shot my you shot my hopes to pieces with that one, you know. So yeah, look, cool one there. Oceans Apart was another track, of course, that I thought was pretty solid, and picture that. Again, with Roger Waters' albums, though, you're not going to really play too many tracks one-off. It's more of an album effort. So that's kind of how it lays with Roger Waters. So yeah, the last of his album up there. And now we move on to David Gilmore with his latest solo offering, Rattle That Lock. And this was a really strong album from David Gilmore. I really did enjoy this effort here. You know, it's a very stark comparison on the cover. I love the colouring, the shading, everything about it. It's just fantastic right off that cover work. I love it. You know, and you jump in from 5 a.m. to Rattle That Lock. These two songs transition perfectly into each other. And that's the thing that, you know, with David Gilmour's latter stuff is it continues. It does this a lot, you know, and it just flows on so well from there. You know, there's other tracks as well that really stand out, like Faces of Stone, The Girl in the Yellow Dress, and Then as well. That's another track that I really did enjoy. The 10-track EP, but it was extended for, you know, deluxe editions, of course, radio edits, yada yada yada, that kind of jazz. And there's also the 12-inch extended radio dub. Why does that harkens back to like 20 years ago when you would get a single or something like that, and there would always be the single, the B-side, and then there'll be the remixes, 5 remixes after or something like that. So that's interesting, because yeah, it's got that Rattle That Lock standard mix, you know, the youth mix, the radio edit, yada yada. So Rattle That Lock for me, I thoroughly enjoyed this album by David Gilmour. I think he really nailed it on this, and of course the subsequent tour that he did as well, you know, live in Pompeii and stuff, which I'll talk about in a minute. But yeah, Rattle That Lock, people. That's where it sits for me. I love this album. Curious to hear your thoughts. And of course, the last David Gilmour solo album for this list, and that is On an Island. I think this was the first David Gilmour solo album I ever listened to. I remember I got it some time back, I think when it was released, back in 2006, and I borrowed the CD. And it's a funny booklet because it's the copy that he had anyway was paper. It was like this cardboard, folder. It was almost like a book, I guess you could say. It had this spine to it, and this beautiful blue cover, and a stark comparison with the moon and the shade, of course. And the birds continue again. I didn't actually notice that until just now when I'm looking at the album artwork. So I wonder if that's a continuation there from Rattle That Lock. But On an Island is such a great album of his. I thought when I listened to this is such fantastic fantastic music to listen to and hear. And look, I'm not going to beat around the bush here. I am a David Gilmour fan. I prefer his stuff over Roger Waters. I find it much more enjoyable. I like the whimsical lyrics that David Gilmour brings, much more lighthearted compared to what Roger Waters has. Easier to digest. You could say that's a negative, but for me, I don't think so. Yeah, David Gilmour knows how to write some tunes, and he knows how to really nail it. And I think this is perfectly on display here on an island, because you had the little acoustic opener with Castellorizon flowing onto On an Island. And of course, The Blue and Take a Breath was a cool little track, I thought. A bit that little take a breath, take a deep, deep breath. And then it just built up and, dun, 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 dun. Yeah, so I really love that. The first couple of tracks there, Red Sky Night, this Heaven, I thought was a really good one. And if you flow onto there, then I close my eyes, smile, a pocket full of stones, another decent track, and of course the album closer where we start. And it's really, I just can't describe how much nostalgia I guess it brings back to me. It's such a great album to hear. And of course that would be followed up by another live album, another thing that David Gilmour was doing around about that time. Release an album, release a live album from the tour. And same with Rattle That Lock. And it was great because, the live album was, of course, On an Island, then Pink Floyd stuff. And I loved it. I really did love this time in Pink Floyd's, when I was getting into Pink Floyd, I should say. It was really, really cool. So, yeah, for me, On an Island, I think is his best solo work. And I rate it much higher than Roger Waters' stuff. I'll be curious to hear your thoughts, if you think On an Island is best as far as David Gilmour's works go, or maybe some other album of his. Maybe you like Rattle That Lock, maybe you liked his self-titled one, maybe About Face for some reason. But I thought On an Island was an excellent album of his. So now we really reach the heavy hitters with Pink Floyd's album Animals. We're really at the meat of Pink Floyd's criterion here, and the 1977 release was a very intriguing time in Pink Floyd's history. Animals saw, I guess it was around at the time, I guess as well, you got to keep in mind, 1977, prog rock is dead, punk rock is on the rise. And here is this album by prog rock elite Pink Floyd, and it is 5 tracks. The first and the last ones are part 1, part 2, intro, outros, and then you have 3 really long tracks. You got Dogs, 17 minutes, Pigs, 3 different ones, 11.5 minutes, and Sheep, 10.5 minutes. And then you got the iconic cover as well with the Battersea power plant with the flying pig there, which was I love the album art for that one. The Battersea power plant has actually been knocked down since in the last couple of years from memory. It's unfortunate. And the pig as well was lost for quite some time from memory. It was used on the tour, and I believe it was stolen. It was a really weird time, in Pink Floyd's history. And obviously, the tour that surrounds Animals, was a tumultuous tour that would give rise to the next album. and it was also a tumultuous time in the band. They were trying out a little bit. People say the music felt a bit more rash, almost a little bit of a punk edge to it in the guitar tone, and that's fairly true in some riffs, that's for sure, compared to previous stuff. And I guess Roger Waters' writing is starting to really flare up as well, because look at the lyrics of Dogs and what it's describing, what it's talking about, and of course pigs as well as sheep. All of these lyrics are really driving it home, I guess, with what they're talking about. I won't give too much away, but Animals is, for me, actually, it was one of the last 70s albums I was yet to listen to from Pink Floyd, until I was talking to someone about, obviously, Pink Floyd, and he said, oh yeah, if you haven't listened to Animals, you got to listen to that album. And I'm like, I've never listened to Animals. I don't know why. I didn't have access to it, actually. I didn't buy the CD. And he's like, yeah, get your hands on that album. You will thoroughly enjoy it. Sure enough, I did, didn't I? And of course, there was also the 2018 remix, which I don't think I've really gone to, and I've heard some things about them. I don't know how much is different compared to the original album, except for the album cover. It looks like they're rebuilding the Battersea power plant there. I don't know, but anyway, I haven't gone back to the remix version, so I've heard some things about that. Very little, but I've heard some things, not necessarily good things, about the remix. So anyway, maybe I'll go and check that one out sometime a bit later. But Animals, absolutely amazing album from the band, and it's always great to hear. I love throwing this on. In particular, Dogs, fantastic track there that stands out to me. Dogs is an amazing track. And we move on to the last Pink Floyd album, the last studio album, The Division Bell, released in 1994. I love this album cover. Pink Floyd is a band that do amazing album artworks, but this one always seems so iconic of of the time and stuff like that. These statues were actually built and placed out in a field, and I think they're like 5 or 6 meters tall, weighing like a ton each or something like that. And they look so weird, looking at it from, here's these two giant faces. Is it two giant faces? Is it just, two giant faces looking into each other, or is it the reflection of the other one? It's kind of leaves a bit to question, I suppose. But yeah, these are actually statues that were built for the album artwork and that purpose. But enough about the album artwork. We're here to talk about the music, aren't we? And the Division Bell is, simply put, the best, like a great send-off for the band, I suppose. This is the second and the last album that was released post Roger Waters, and of course it is such a great album. There is barely any tracks here that just feel unnecessary. From the start, Cluster 1 flowing into What Do You Want From Me, Poles Apart Marooned, A Great Day for Freedom, Wearing the Inside Out, and you keep going on. And there's that kind of vocal effect from, I want to say Stephen Hawkins, but I don't think it is actually Stephen Hawkins. It sounds a lot like him. That was on, I think it was it Coming Back to Life? I'm trying to remember now. But yeah, was it A Great Day for Freedom? I can't remember. But this is an album where I don't simply play 1 or 2 tracks, with the exception for one. I play the whole album from start to finish, because this is so good. And I think it was used in, I want to say, I remember it in not Jurassic Park, in the Jumanji remake. I think there was a scene where, they were looking back at the 90s at the very beginning, and I'm pretty sure Pink Floyd's album cover was there, which I found a bit unusual considering the other bands around, because you had Nirvana's and Soundgarden, whatever, in the background. Then you had Pink Floyd, and I'm like, I somehow feel that wasn't right. I don't really know. I can't remember. I was very young in 1994, but I don't know if the youth anyway was really into the Division Bell. I hope so. I really do. Would restore my faith in humanity. But it's still awesome. And of course, then it really culminates on the final track, High Hopes, which apparently was the last track that Pink Floyd recorded at all. And of course, is a weary and cautionary tale of the band and their story. You know, the band set out with high hopes to, I guess, conquer the world, enter these turbulent times, and unfortunately have their breakup and stuff like that. So, you know, it starts off with that lone piano, that ding, dun, 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 and of course ends with the bells in the end there. And yeah, it's just such a solemn piece, a somber piece, or solemn. Anyway, it takes you aback, I guess, you know, because you've got these fantastic openers and stuff like that with, you know, Poles Apart, Cluster 1, where, you know, the first 6 tracks are really cool, but then High Hopes just dials it back and goes to that raw emotion, if you will, and it's just such a great way to send off the band. You know, this is Pink Floyd, people. There's only one way to go out, and it's our way. It's a fantastic track. So, you know, if you haven't listened to The Division Bell, really recommend you go and check that one out. That's a really good album. And I kind of feel like The Division Bell, you know, is enjoyed by the fan base, but I don't think it's enjoyed as much as I would anyway. Probably doesn't get ranked as high as well. I don't know. I'm curious to find out. Once again, like, you know, if you're watching this, tell me your list below. I'd like to know. The Wall is up next, scraping in at number 4 here. Yeah, it might seem a bit low, I guess, on many people's lists, but considering what is up next, well, I'm not surprised, to be honest. But Pink Floyd's The Wall, there's a lot of a story to be told about this record. Again, this obviously dates to the Animals tour, which I mentioned was a very turbulent time in Pink Floyd's history, and pretty much The Wall started when Roger Waters was on tour at the Animals tour and got spat on by a fan. You know, and all this shit was going down. It wasn't a really fun time for the band, and you know, he got spat on by his band. He felt angry, and he's like, "This isn't what music is about." And he said he obviously built a wall during performances. You know, and this metaphorical wall would eventuate into the writing of The Wall, a story that chronicles, you know, a fictional character, Pink, who is a rock star and succumbing to fame, drugs, and just everything around him going absolutely tits up, you know, and also resonating back to his childhood. And he's on trial the whole time. Obviously, you know the story of The Wall, but yeah, it's this really interesting story. It is Roger Waters' love piece to Pink Floyd and his father, who of course who passed away during the war. And yeah, it just had this double album, one of the best concept albums ever written as well. I gotta say that straight off the bat, one of. And, you know, The Wall is so amazing when you're going through it. And if you haven't watched the movie, you gotta watch the movie. It stars Bob Geldof as Pink, and it's just really visually trippy in areas. Very well directed. Of course, it's got the background music of The Wall, so technically, is this a soundtrack? I don't know, but if it is, I'd say it's a good one. You know, the movie wasn't filmed until I think 82 or something like that. You know, it wouldn't be for a while, but you know, eventually that did come to be. And also, when The Wall was done and they toured and they were trying to build all this shit up on stage, they ended up actually losing money during the entire tour. They lost money. We're talking about a band that sold a gajillion records, and they did a tour to have this giant artistic, you know, design. Oh, we're going to build a wall during the gig, and then we're going to tear it down. Okay, that's going to cost a lot of money, you know. And even better, I think, was Richard Wright. I think was fired from the band at this stage, but he was rehired, and only as a guest musician during the subsequent tour for The Wall. So Gilmore, Waters, and Mason all lost money, except for Richard Wright. It might have been Richard Wright or Nick Mason. Sorry, I can't recall who. One of these two, though, were fired from the band, and I'm sure it was Richard Wright. Anyway, so when they went through that tour, every band member lost money, like I said, except for, Richard Wright or whoever it was, who was hired as a musician. So he actually gained money the entire tour. Having the last laugh in regards to that one. But yeah, this is a really good album, start to finish. You can't pass on Comfortably Numb. Another Brick in the Wall, part 1 and 2. There's other songs as well. Like, it's a bit hard to pick individual songs for this album because, it all is a story. It all flows so well. But yeah, like Another Brick in the Wall, part 1, 2, and 3 is really, really good. Young Lust, of course, really good track there. One of My Turns, yeah, not bad. Is There Anybody Out There is cool. Hey You, but yeah, Comfortably Numb. Wow. David Gilmore bringing in the goods on that track. That solo is so cool. And of course, Run Like Hell, really cool. It's like disco-y almost, that bass line. Boom, 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 bum, ba-dum, bum, ba-da-bum, ba-dum, bum, da-da-dum, dum. Run, run, run. And interestingly enough, so like I said, the band lost money during that tour, but the one and only time that I've ever seen Roger Waters performing live, I saw him perform The Wall in its entirety. And I gotta say, the artistic vision of what he had finally caught up in technology for that tour. This is probably about 10-15 years ago. I can't recall, but it was a while ago. Anyway, and of course they built the wall up on the stage. They had it was pretty much like TVs, I guess you could say. These blocks were just added in, these blocks, and they could be, a visual cue could run across it. I don't know how, it's like projectors or something. And it looked like, obviously, these projectors were projecting the wall blocks. But then, eventually, the light would cut out and it would go, red, and the hammers would walk past. Or, these visual cues for people who had died during war, and names came up. It was absolutely phenomenal. And, of course, it all started off with the plane crash, which is heard at the very beginning of the album on In the Flesh. That plane just coming in. Yeah, anyway, Spitfire came down, crashed it right at the beginning. So yeah, Roger Waters was performing, absolutely great concert, and then the whole wall got built up and we're waiting for that moment. The wall got knocked down and it was amazing. It was one of the best concerts I've ever been to witness that, So I got a lot of fond memories with The Wall, but I think I've listened to it that many times that, for me anyway, it does sit in the 4th spot, I think there is better ones up ahead. So next up, I'm going to choose Medal. What an album. What a new process for Pink Floyd. Like I said earlier on, possibly in part 1 now, Adam Hart Mother was, I guess, the bridge, the gap between the 60s era Pink Floyd to what would become. And this is the album of what Pink Floyd would become, because they have really landed in their element on Medal. It's this album. Again, this is an album I didn't discover until much later on, and and one I gotta say, whenever I saw the album artwork, I didn't know it was an ear. For years, I didn't know that was an ear. Someone mentioned it somewhere, and I was like, "Wait, that's an ear? Oh my god, it is too." And then, of course, there's the fully fold-out version, which would have made more sense, I guess, if I had the physical copy, or if I took it out of the book. I can't remember. I think I did buy the CD. But, yeah. Idiot. I didn't do that. Why? So, yeah, of course, Metal sees the band really firing all pistons, and they're starting to get into their own element. They're starting to get into their element, I should say. I should correct myself there. One of the best Pink Floyd songs ever put to record, and one of the best intro tracks, startup tracks I should say. One of these days, Roger Waters just plays that bass line, that single note for the entire, I think it's for the entire runtime of that song. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but I'm fairly certain it's for the entire runtime. One of these days, just plodding along. No, actually it does transition. Anyway, but yeah, so one of these days, plodding along bass line, one of the best most powerfully driving. It's so simple, but it's so effective. That bass line just plodding along, and then, the band just kick in. All the instruments just start getting in there, adding, and it adds the atmosphere. It adds to that tension as well. And David Gilmour's goddamn guitar playing in that, he nails it out of the park. He comes into his own on this record. He develops his signature tone, his style. All of it is present on Metal. It's not even fathomable how people say Syd Barrett versus David Gilmour. Fuck off. David Gilmour is here. Syd Barrett is way below him. Just apples and oranges, I guess, but still, David Gilmour was an amazing guitarist. Is an amazing guitarist. So yeah, the solo on One of These Days is probably one of my favourite Pink Floyd solos as well. The way that this song just goes through and Gilmour just plays that slide guitar, plays his solo along. And then there's the one-liner, "One of these days I'm going to chop you into little pieces." And then bang, the drums kick in. Yeah, amazing. Just chills thinking about that. With everything going on, it's such a sick track there. The next couple of tracks, they go pretty good. Pillar of Winds, yeah, that's cool. Fearless, like it. Saint-Tropez and Seamus the dog. That's probably the weakest track. Well, that's going to be the weakest track on the album. I don't mind it. It's just a very, I don't know, it kind of harkens back to that Adam Hart era. Singing about a dog. And actually, sorry, I want to back that one back up to Fearless, because I'm fairly certain that's got the Liverpool FC anthem singing in it. I think they're singing Liverpool's song. Could be wrong there. But yeah, I think it is. You'll Never Walk Alone or something. Yeah, so anyway. But yeah, Seamus the dog, yeah, forget that track. It is the one that I'd almost skip. If this album didn't have Seamus on it, it might sit one spot higher. And to be honest, it almost did, because I haven't even talked about Echoes. And damn, Echoes. This is Pink Floyd writing 20-minute tracks. This is the best. I think it's only one of a few tracks, but this is the best 20+ minute Pink Floyd song you'll ever hear. 23 minutes, 32 seconds. There we go, the runtime, people. A fantastic track that begins off with the pings, the echoes of what is a submersible craft, possibly, who knows. Could be radar or something. And then the guitars go into play, and, it is a little bit spacey to begin with, but then it just goes into its full, second part, much more grounded, until it really transitions over towards the third part. And again, it gets more spacey like that, but each transition between the songs is so flawlessly done. It's perfect. Everything just going down, and again, David Gilmour is just king on here. He's nailing the guitar parts. Absolutely great to hear. And I'll say this, any live performance which has been laid down, I think it's better than what the metal version is. And I'll once again, I'm going to get to live records at the end of this episode. We're going to be talking about live records. But yeah, of course, Echoes, fantastic. Live versions, that's even better. It's a true wet dream there. So yeah, for me, Metal is definitely at third. Could have been second almost. Album that absolutely everyone owns. This album has sold, I think, like 45 million units. At the end of the day, it's just ridiculous how many units this record sold. It's unthinkable, especially, it's unfathomable, I should say, especially in today's age, because, you don't buy physical copies, nowhere near the extent of what it was 20 plus years ago, because obviously we have streaming, we have all this access to music whenever we want. So buying a CD is showing that you really want to support your musician by owning a physical copy. There's also various other reasons, but let's not digress into that. But Dark Side of the Moon, people, for me is number 2 in regards to the Pink Floyd catalogue. I mean, you know what? A couple of years ago, I definitely thought this was an overrated album by Pink Floyd. There was always the tracks that everyone knew, but I actually had it almost 2 spots lower, because I just, this is an album, it's a bit space rocky, opera type of thing, and didn't really get into it, I guess. There was always the couple of tracks that I enjoyed from it, Us and Them, The Great Gig in the Sky and such like that. Any Colour You Like, yeah, all good. Money was the one I always heard on the radio, because it was the biggest song off that album, of course. I particularly remember from like WSFM. If you go from Sydney, you know this one. Yeah, WSFM, always the oldies, the golden oldies, people. And Money always seemed to be on. And it was just that track that I probably persistently heard for about, 15 years growing up on loop. And of course, it's every time, there's some kind of segment or something in news, it's either 1 or 2 tracks regarding money or banking. It's obviously the Money by Pink Floyd, or I Want Your Money, the other one I can't think of. But yeah, this is a perfect record from start to finish. There is no dead air on here. Talking about 43 minutes of perfection, all in this bloody... This is such a good fucking album. I don't think there's going to be many arguments saying otherwise. It is so good. The story that is with this. And there's a lot of people who say, oh yeah, you could play this to the Wizard of Oz, and it times up perfectly with this and that. Man, you could do that with any other album by any other musician, and I'm sure it would time itself perfectly with something. If you're looking for it, you will find it. Why don't you put a Tool album to the Wizard of Oz? Because that almost seems more plausible that they did that as opposed to Pink Floyd. Yeah. And of course, there's been so many different bands who have covered it full, from the Violent Femmes doing their thing, and was it the Violent Femmes? I'm having a mental blank now. Or the Flaming Lips, actually, I think it was. The Flaming Lips doing their cover of the whole album. There was also the Doom Side of the Moon, covered by various doom metal acts. The Dub Side of the Moon, covered by, I think they were just called All Stars. Yeah, I think they were just called All Stars. It's just some like supergroup band, reggae ska almost band. So yeah, Dub Side of the Moon. It was cool. And I think, no, not that, not misspoke there. I was thinking of another band, but they did not do the Dark Side of the Moon. They did a dub side of something, but not the moon. So yeah, look, absolutely great to hear these tracks. Of course, there's just nothing wrong. If you play this album, you will understand. Do not go to the Redux. Play this one instead. This album right there. That's the version you need to hear. You need to get your hands on that one. Not the Redux, that one. Do not go to the Redux, that one. That one. So yeah, Breathe in the Air, On the Run, Time, The Great Gig in the Sky, with absolutely mind-blowing vocals. Money, just probably think the first bass line I ever learned to play. Really good bass line, actually. I got to actually a shout out to the Roger Waters there. One of the few Pink Floyd songs where the bass line was absolutely the driving force behind the song there. Shout out to Roger and his bass work there. And yeah, it goes on from there. Us and Them, really sick track. Any Colour You Like, Brain Damage. And of course, the ending with Eclipse. And it's very much a trip. This is an album that you really wish was longer at the end of the day, but there's no point in it being longer at the end of the day either. It's a perfect record. There is nothing wrong here. No bad tracks. Nothing to skip. And that's why it sits at second spot for me, because Wish You Were Here is number 1. It was always going to be number 1 for me. There was no doubt in my mind when I was making this list as to what the number 1 slot was going to, because Wish You Were Here is in my top 3 albums of all time. Up there with Queens of the Stone Age, and of course the other one being Metallica's Black Album. So those 3 albums are up there with the albums that absolutely changed me. Songs for the Deaf, I don't think I mentioned it. So yeah, Wish You Were Here. When I put this album on the first time listening to it, actually, I'm going to dive into a quick story here, but, been on holiday, we went to a record store, my dad and me, and, we were going through records and whatever, having a look at these things, and I came across this, Wish You Were Here, that album artwork there. This is a weird album artwork, here is a person standing in what appears to be some kind of Hollywood movie set, with on fire, shaking hands with another man, both of them in suits. Just what the fuck is going on? Because I have no idea. It just is. It asks more questions than it answers, doesn't it? What the hell is exactly going on here? But it's so iconic. It's so well shot. This perfect clear sky. This shading like the sun is in the afternoon almost, and yeah, it's another one. From what I understand, I think early vinyls, you couldn't see the artwork. It was actually just a white cover. You had to open it up, and you would find that artwork. And of course, even when you open the booklet up further, there was more designs throughout. So I really wish, if I ever got into vinyl collecting, this is probably the first one I would ever buy. just to get my hands on that. Yeah, I'm not getting into vinyls. It costs too much, and I don't have enough space to, store a whole bunch of vinyls. I'm happy with my CD collection, and that's big enough. Maybe I'll go through that on different episodes, but still, Wish You Were Here, everyone. 1975, 5 songs, just under 45 minutes in length, an absolute perfection. Shine On You Crazy Diamonds, part 1 through 5, which also goes to the other half of the album with 6 through 9. It was split because it was too long to fit onto one bloody side. So, yeah, what is that, a 20, almost, doing quick math, 25, 26 minute track. And it is dedicated, I don't care what people say, it is dedicated to Syd Barrett. And it was interesting because Syd Barrett also came into the studio at this point of time. They were recording the album, and Syd Barrett, they hadn't seen him in years. He walks in, it'd probably been, I think, 5-6 years since they last saw him, and he just walks in the studio while Pink Floyd's recording Wish You Were Here, and just sits there and watches the band. And they're playing away, and they're kind of, who's this guy over here in the corner? Keeping in mind, though, he was looking completely different. He had a shaven head as opposed to his long hair. He had his eyebrows, I think, shaved off, and he was also much heavier. He was a big boy. He gained like 30 or 40 kilos. So, for someone you hadn't seen, I guess, in 6 years, and then you see him again, and they've shaved off their hair, and all of a sudden gained 30 or odd kilos, you would have a hard time noticing who they were, especially if they just kind of sat down and just didn't talk to you as well, didn't acknowledge you. And once they figured out who it was, they tried to get him to record on some songs. He just didn't really want any part of it, and they even invited him out to, I think there was some kind of event they were going to, I can't remember, but they invited him out to some event. He did come out for a little bit, but disappeared, and that was like the last that the band, most of the band, saw of him ever, except for Roger Waters, which has another story. But yeah, the band, when they saw him, obviously broke into tears. The sight of him, and it was just chaotic. But Roger Waters has a story actually where he met him again some years after, at a shopping centre. I think he was saying that he was like a greeter or something like that. So yeah, that was an odd one, but I can't recall it straight away. So yeah, Shine On You Crazy Diamond, written after Syd Barrett, dedicated to him, I guess, in memoriam, almost. I think I got a funny feeling this was the track that they were working on. So it's kind of like, because there's not much vocals to it, right? There's not much lyrics. How different could this have been if Syd Barrett never turned up to the studio? Like, how different would the lyrics be? Also, another thing, Imagine walking in on Pink Floyd just recording. You could do that back in the day. I mean, I've heard so many stories of people doing that back in the day. You know, bands like Motorhead, Lars walking in on them, the Beatles, Queen, fuck you name it. You know, everyone was just walking in on everyone. Hey, what's going on over here? Yeah, you couldn't do that now, I guarantee it. But anyway, yeah, Shine on Crazy Diamonds. We haven't even got to the second track. Welcome to the Machine. As far as this whole album went, it's probably the most overlooked song. But it's still such a sick tune. It's amazing. You know, when you're looking over it, you just kind of go like, welcome to the machine. And then these spacey weird shit's going down. And, you know, I think it's a bit of, like Richard Wright trying out some sampling like they did with the previous album, Dark Side of the Moon. And yeah, it's cool. It's cool. I'm not gonna lie, but you know, compare it to that intro from Shine On You Crazy Diamond with that lone guitar playing through the saxophone, whatever going on. I'll never forget the moment when I first played that and I first heard that. It was jaw dropping. It was eerie. You know, I had my headphones playing, and next second, you know, playing through your headphones, and you're like, oh my god, this album is speaking to me. I don't know how to describe it. It's only a lone guitar at this point, but it's just wow. And of course, then we go on Have a Cigar. Really cool track there from the band. Have a Cigar. You're gonna go far. You're gonna make it all, and all the rest of that. But interestingly enough, this song was actually covered for the Mission Impossible 2 soundtrack. It was covered by Brian May and the Foo Fighters. Fun fact for the day, there's your pub trivia. So yeah, there is a version of Have a Cigar out there with Foo Fighters, Dave Grohl singing, and Brian May playing guitar to it. So check that out, because that's actually a decent version. People probably hate it, but I liked it. I really did. And of course, we get to one of the band's most famous songs ever, with Wish You Were Here. The acoustic track, the haunting social distance of being two lost souls in a fishbowl swimming together year after year, is such a resonating line, I guess. It's, yeah, we're drifting this earth together, everyone. There's no escaping it. So please tolerate each other. I just wish the band took it under their wing, because it's unfortunate. But yeah, Wish You Were Here. A song that is played so many times by so many artists, but I am not going to get tired of hearing these tracks over and over anytime soon. Never. So yeah, Wish You Were Here, and people, is number one for me, and for good, you know, metric. It's such a good album. So before you all go away, I just wanted to talk about a few of the live albums from the Pink Floyd members and the band themselves, starting off with Nick Mason's first and only live album, which is his band, The Saucer Full of Secrets. Yes, that's right. He performs a lot of the early material on this record here, and it's actually pretty damn good. He even goes back to Adam Hart Mother, or at least a shortened version of the track, because let's face it, that 23-minute version is just absolutely crap. Even a lot of the band members hated that, which is interesting to hear. Anyway, goes and plays a lot of their early stuff, and I appreciate this version of him, you know, coming back and doing this only a couple of years ago. I thought that was a really cool, you know, take on some old music done for the newer age. The other one I wanted to talk about, of course, was Roger Waters. Two of his live albums. We have In the Flesh, which is a really, really good album of his. I think the version of Dogs on that album is incredible. But The Wall live in Berlin. So right when The Wall came down, of course, in Germany, they were reunited, and you know, Roger Waters flies out and performs The Wall. It's very suitable for the, you know, what is going on in the times, and it's a really cool rendition of the album being played live. I think Van Morrison played a song in there. I think it was on Mother, and Sinead O'Connor and a few other musicians there. So Roger Waters versions of these live albums, really nice. Then we jump over to David Gilmore, and I want to point out to his two live albums, Live in Gdansk, which is really really good to me anyway. You know, it plays the first disc, which is all his solo material from On an Island, and then you jump over to disc 2, where he plays all the older stuff, which includes Shine On You Crazy Diamond, Fat Old Sun, High Hopes, and of course we hit Echoes, an incredible version of that track. And of course live at Pompeii as well, where he does a couple of tracks from his more recent Rattle That Lock album before jumping into some of the other tracks. One of These Days is one of the highlights anyway on that album there. Now we go into Pink Floyd, and again we're going to the Live at Pompeii record from 1972, I believe this one was, and this is around about the time that Metal was released. And this is the best version of Echoes. If you watch the video clip, it is mind-blowing. For the video, it was actually separated into 2 parts there, but David Gilmour's guitar tone is perfect for that record. You know, so you've got to go check that out. They, of course, tap into their earlier days with Careful With That Axe, A Saucer Full of Secrets. One of These Days is a good track for there, and set the controls for The Heart of the Sun. And we can't go past Pulse, which is just you have to listen to it. If you're a Pink Floyd fan, that's just necessary listening, in my opinion anyway. You know, fantastic visuals from the band and On Their Way Out. But before we leave, the last live album that Pink Floyd that you really must check out is on the 50th anniversary for The Dark Side of the Moon, which has The Dark Side of the Moon performed in full live at Wembley Stadium in 1974. This only just recently came out earlier this year and is really, really good. So, thank you for checking out this episode, and I hope that you enjoyed the content. I mean, I'd be curious, is this your number 1 album? I guarantee there's more people out there who agree with me and say it is the best album Pink Floyd have. But I'd be curious out there with your reviews, you know, where would you place these albums? Because there is so many Pink Floyd albums out there at the end of the day, and you know, there's the fan base that probably love the 60s era, or maybe there's the fan base who love the 80s era, or others who just say, you know, Dark Side of the Moon, it's overrated. You know, I'd be curious, right below people, you know, what's your rankings of the Pink Floyd album? You don't have to do the whole solo thing like I did, but I'd be curious to find out, so write it below. If you've enjoyed this content, make sure to smash that like button, subscribe to us, and stay notified for future music related content, because it keeps our manager happy at the end of the day. We are also on Discord, Instagram, Facebook, and all those other social platforms if you want to check us out. As always, people, you have a great day and stay spicy.